Welcome to Managing a Web Server, Topic 4. This topic is on backups and access. So, tar, the tape archive, gzip and bzip2. So I've put quite an amusing little machine here that's rolling out some tar, all right, because we're going to be talking about tar files. And this is some kind of a tape archive machine, I think. I'm not entirely sure there. Okay, so right, tar. What does tar do? Tar creates an archive file, sometimes called a tarball, because it's like rolling up the file into a ball. Now, with tar, we can combine multiple files into one file. Okay, so by doing tar minus minus create minus minus file equals archive.tar, and then telling it what files we want to put into archive.tar, we can create a file called archive.tar, and there's actual shorthand for this, so we don't have to do minus minus create, we can just do minus c, and we don't have to say minus minus file equals, we can just do minus f, the name of the tar file, and the two files that are being sent into the archive.tar. And even better, we can join these two together, and we can just do tar minus cf archive.tar and the files that we want to go into the tar archive. Two more little flags we can add here. V gives us verbose output. So that will mean it will just tell us what it's doing while it's doing it. And if we want to extract an archive file, we just change this letter C to an X for extract. Okay, so here's some examples of some tar files. Let's create a backup of all of Bob's documents by doing tar minus cvf docs.tar to create an archive file called docs. And then we're just going to specify the path to Bob's documents, and it will put all of Bob's documents into this archive file here. So let's create a backup of all of Bob's music using just the same command there, except we're going to give the path to the music. And if we wanted to restore a backup of all of Bob's documents to the current directory that we were in, the current working directory, we could just do tar minus extract verbosely file docs.tar. So that is tar. Now, this is also a picture of some tar there. Tar is actually short for tar macadam, I think, because the person who invented tarmac was of Scottish ancestry, I think. Maybe he was Scottish. I think he was. Tar macadam. Anyway, gzip. Right. So the problem with tar is, right, tar can combine multiple files into one archive, okay? But what tar cannot do is it cannot compress those files. So it's very clever at joining lots of files together in an archive, but it doesn't necessarily make them smaller. They're just the sum of their equal parts. It doesn't reduce the size. And this is where we need some kind of a compression tool. And that compression tool is gzip, okay? GNU zip is the full name of gzip. So gzip will compress text files to 60 or 70% reduction of their current size. And gzip is dead easy. All you do is you type gzip and then you type the name of the file. If you want to unzip a gzip file, and the extension of a gzip file is gz, you just simply type gunzip and the name of the file. So that's great. That's brilliant. Now, because obviously, if you're used to living in the Windows world, you would be used to just using zip files. You wouldn't think of two separate utilities, one to join the files together and one to compress them. But we actually have another option for zipping, and that's called bzip2. So bzip2, a nice logo there for it, joins files together and will actually reduce the size of those files. Okay, now when we go for a gzip file, okay, gzip gives us a fast compression, so 60 to 70% reduction. bzip2, however, will give us even more compression than gzip, but the downside is bzip2 is a lot slower. Okay, so here's a little comparison side by side. So we have some original files in this graph here. Okay, we run them through tar and we maybe trim off a little bit of excess nonsense, but really it's the same size. Okay, zip with no compression will give us the same. Now, tar and gzip will take the file size down to about here, but tar and bzip2 will actually reduce the file even more. Now, this is an MP3, JPEG, and text, mixed type of files. The problem with bzip is that it takes longer to run than gzip. Okay, to do a bzip2 as well, we put a J here. So this command here, for example, what we're doing is we're doing tar create verbosely, so tell me what you're doing, a gzip of the file. Okay, so if we were to use bzip, we actually change that Z there to a J. Okay, so there's just slight variations. I've got some examples of the command later on. Okay, so let's move on to the next topic then. The next topic is SCP, secure copy. Now, SCP actually allows us to copy a file securely using SSH from one machine to the other. Okay, so SCP is a network protocol, uses TCP port 22, and I've probably shown you examples. If you did my network security concepts class last year, we would have used or tried to use SCP. It's basically the same syntax as SSH, except you say SCP and then you tell it a file name, then you do user at IP address, and you say where you want the file to go. So SCP myfile.txt to Michael at 192.168.1.1 and put it into the documents folder. All right, and that's the basic syntax of SCP. So if you just remember, you do SCP file name, username at IP address, then the colon symbol, then the remote directory. And there's various other flags we can add. We can put the different port number. For example, I've got 2 servers in here and they both run on different ports for SSH. So here's some examples. We want to securely copy file 1 from a faraway machine, from a remote host. We can actually do SCP and put the username at the remote IP address, then the path to the file, and this little dot here, okay, means copy it to the current directory. So it can work both ways. We can pull a file with SCP, or we can push a file. So SCP, then the file name, then the name, the username, IP address, and destination directory of the file. Okay, so I can give you some examples of that running. Here I've got a Debian server here running on, so that looks like it's running on the NAT IP address. So what I'll do is I'll just go to my network settings. Let's go removable devices, network adapter settings. NAT. So let's change that to abridged network. Okay. And then we'll see if we can get away with it without rebooting the machine. Let's do IPA. Oh, look up here. See that dropped? There we go, IPA. Now we've got 192.168.100.2. Brilliant. So let me open a terminal on my local machine now. So here we go. This, the slightly bluer terminal, is my local machine, my local server here, and this is my remote machine over here. So if I do IPA on here, my IP address should be 192.168.100.6. So 192.168.100.6 is my local machine, and the virtual machine is running on 100.2. Right, let's make a file then. Okay, so my file, let's call it my file October. No idea where I come up with these. Right. Okay, so there's, October. Right, there's my file October. Right, so let's say I want to copy my file October over to this machine. Let's do ls here. Okay, so there's a file called myfile.com, but we definitely can't see myfile_October. All right, let's put some text into my file. So let's pop in some hello there. Let's save that. Right, now what we're going to do is we're going to use the SCP protocol to securely copy it over SSH to this machine. So let's do SCP, okay, my file October. Okay, so we've said securely copy this file. We need to now tell it where. Okay, we want to copy it to EC at 192.168.100.2, and I want it to go into /home/EC, which I believe, if we do print working directory, is where we are over here. So let's run that. Oh, it doesn't like something about the key. Right, hold on. ECSA host key has changed and you have requested strict checking. Host key verification failed. Ooh, I've not seen this one for a while. Right, hold on. Let me just fire this one into Google then. This is a classic. I've seen this happen in a wee while, right? How to fix warning about... Okay. Remove the cached key on the local machine. Okay. So what it's saying is, apparently, I have a cached key for that machine over here. So I can remove that by doing SSH. I'm guessing I'm going to have to do this as root. Now, this is quite good. Troubleshooting live. Key gen and remove 192.168.100.2. Interesting. Now if I leave there and we run our command again, oh, right, what's it saying? Oh, look, it's telling me how to remove it. How silly am I? So SSH keygen -f to there from known hosts. Okay, let's do that. Do that. Is it going to allow me? Okay, now run. Great. It's allowing me now. Okay, so let's do, yes, we want to continue. Pop in EC's password, and there you go. It's telling me it's copied this over 100% in no seconds, basically. If it was a big file, sometimes you see this slowly ticking away. So over here now on our server, if I do ls, you should see there's myfile_October. And if I cat myfile_October, we should see in there, it says hello there. All right. So there we go. The file has arrived from server to server. So hopefully that was a bit of troubleshooting in there as well. And hopefully that seems straightforward to everyone. Right. The last part today is about the file transfer protocol, FTP and SFTP. So the file transfer protocol is used for the transfer of files between a client and a server using port 2. No, it doesn't. It uses port 21. Let me fix that. Slide 14, port 21. I'll fix that. FTP is built on a client-server model using separate control and data connections between the client and the server. So hopefully we've heard of and seen FTP before. We're actually going to set this up in the lab today. SFTP is the secure file transfer protocol. Okay. Now, SFTP is its own application in itself. Okay, it's different from SCP. SCP can just copy a quick file between machines. SFTP, though, is a whole protocol in itself. It can do lots of clever things, SFTP. And one of the classic differences, or the big kind of selling points, is if you have to copy multiple files, SFTP is better to use. Finally, SCP. If you interrupt a copy in the middle of an SCP session, it will just give up. Okay, but SFTP uses acknowledgements. So if you were to pull the network cable out halfway through an SFTP transfer, when you put the network cable back in, SFTP would take off from where it last finished. It would start moving from where it last finished. So SFTP is a little bit cleverer. Now, SFTP is designed to improve FTP because FTP uses plain text, like Telnet. Okay, think of this like Telnet. So this is the new and improved version, and we have keys on both sides that encrypt the plain text into ciphertext to send over the internet. Now, I actually used to work for a global financial organization, and you'd be surprised how many very large corporate and investment banks are still using FTP. And you'd be surprised how many of their passwords are just their name 123. So, interestingly enough, I mean, there's all sorts of other security, but you'd be very surprised to see this is still around. Right. There was an intermediary kind of protocol called FTP with SSL. And this was just an attempt to secure FTP by adding a certificate, sometimes called FTP SSL or FTP with SSL. But SFTP is really the better protocol, I would say. So there's a little comparison of all of these. Runs TCP over port 21, same as FTP, but has a certificate. This one runs over port 22. It's sometimes called secure FTP. Now, interestingly, SFTP doesn't actually stand for secure FTP. It actually stands for the SSH file transfer protocol. Although I imagine lots of people would argue with me that I'm wrong there if I told them that. But that's apparently what it is. Now, how do we connect to an FTP server? We can use an application called Filezilla. Okay, and Filezilla will let us pop in our host IP address, a username, a password, and a port, and we can connect to a server. And that server could be anywhere in the world. As long as that port and IP address is valid and the username and password are valid, you can get in and you can see the server directories here. So Filezilla is a free program we can download, and Filezilla will allow us to connect to FTP servers. Finally, let's say we download a zip file, but it's been zipped with tar archiving software. Windows by default will not know what to do with that. So there is a program called 7-zip that will let us unzip or extract tar archives on Windows. And that's this 7-zip program. Again, that's a free program as well. You might have actually seen that one out there in the wild. So I'm going to pause the video and I'm just going to show you what we're going to do in the lab today. And then we shall progress on. So let me just pause. So in the lab for backups and access, topic 4, we're going to create a user on our server called user A. Now, you'll be pleased to know you can add a user to a server using a command called add user. You just type add user and then you type the name of the person that you want to add. Now, there is another command that we should not use, and that other command is user add. Never ever use user add. always use add user. Okay. If you use user add, it will create the user, but it won't set them up a home directory and it won't do a lot of things. So we always try and use the add user command, which gives us a lot of extra things. Okay. Then SU, some people have got the misconception that SU stands for super user or sudo or something. It actually stands for switch user. Okay, and we're going to switch user to user A, create a file called test file, take an MD5 sum of the test file, put the MD5 sum into a file called the hash sum file, and then document some evidence of this, take a screenshot of the hash sum. Then we're going to move into SCP and tar. So we are going to take a backup of the test file. So we're going to do tar and create verbosely a file called mybackup.tar, and we're going to save it. Okay, and then we're going to use Filezilla to connect to the server from our host machine, from our Windows machine if we're using Windows, or from our Mac if we're using a Mac, or from Linux. We're going to install Filezilla and we're going to connect to the server and download this backup file that we created. Okay, once we've done that and saved it, we just need to take a screenshot of that. Then we're going to create and back up a website. So we're going to make a new website with this structure, a new website directory, and then we're going to create an index page with this HTML. And then we're going to use the command that we used up here to tar the whole website into one archive. And then we're going to back this up to our host machine, our Windows machine. Then we're going to download 7-zip and extract it and open this index file that we got from the server and show it displaying in the web browser on the local machine. Finally, we're going to run this command here, which will set up the server as an FTP server. And then we should be able to navigate to FTP 127.0.0.1, log in as the EC user, and this will show us FTP's working. And then we should be able to add a screenshot of the test file showing up in our web browser. And then we should be able to connect Filezilla using port 21 this time, as opposed to 22, to the FTP server. So we're going to use SCP, SSH, SFTP, FTP, tar, and probably some other abbreviations, SU, and some other abbreviations that I've forgotten about.